Shalom, shalom, first and foremost. Giving all praises, honor, glory, and worship. La Yahweh Bahashim, Yahushai Bahashim Kodash. Double honors to the elders and the apostles of Great Millstone. Greetings and salutations to you, Akim, upholding the testimony of our Lord and Savior, Yahushai, in truth and in sincerity. To you I say shalom. I have been commissioned to do a breakdown, or I may humbly say an overview of Daniel, the 8th chapter, in the 5th verse concerning the he-goat, and so I shall. This is Daniel chapter 8, verse 5. And as I was considering, and by the way, for context sake, this is during the time of the Babylonians, the latter reign, the latter years of the Babylonian Empire in the Nebu dynasty, specifically during the period of King Belshazzar, king of Babylon, in which Daniel had a vision, and his vision was a vision of prophecy, in which this prophecy foretold the latter end of rulership of kingdoms concerning the Greeks, or concerning the Persians, the Greeks, the Romans, and so on and so forth. But this we will be speaking specifically regarding the Greeks and Alexander. So this is the book of Daniel, the 8th chapter, and the 5th verse. When I was considering, behold, and an he-goat came from the west of the face of the whole earth. Now, who is that he-goat? Well, specifically speaking, that he-goat is the Macedonian, and it's the Macedonian armies, is the Greco armies. All right, and from a geographical perspective, it said it came from the west of the whole earth. Well, that's where you get the Western, what do they say now? The West, the Western philosophy. Well, this started, or the Hellenization of the earth, that started with Alexander and his campaign from Macedonia throughout the Persian Empire, throughout the Levant, all the way to the hills of Afghanistan. This is where it started. This is where you get your Hellenistic period. Now, in the reads it says, a he-goat came from the west of the face of the whole earth. Now let me get a map. Let's get a map so we can see where. Let's get this map. I should have typed in Alexander's Empire. Pardon me. All right. No, because this is going to give a, let me see. So right here, this is good. This is a good map. Now, see here. Right here you see Macedonia. Macedon. This is where they originated from, or as far as their campaigns, because we know Alexander, son of Philip, came, according to the Apocrypha, came from the land of Cathaim, otherwise known in the ancient world Kittim, modernly known as Cyprus, which is a coastal island region near the vicinity of Macedon. Now I wanted to see. Let me get a larger, greater perspective map, so we can see why it says he came from the west of the came from the west. Now, let's see here. All right, perfect. Now this is the empire of Alexander after the finalization of his campaigns, essentially. Now, originally, Alexander, he originated his campaign. This is actually a really good map. I'm going to have to save this. But he originated his campaigns essentially in the landmass. It doesn't say Macedon in this vicinity, but essentially in the region where you see the western portion of this map. All right, slightly northeast of number 8 and north of number 9. All right. Now this is where Alexander, he originated in Macedon. All right. And the scripture says what? Now you see everything that he conquered, which that was unprecedented. And even to this day, the rate of and the efficiency of his conquest, that's why he was known as a leopard, and also in the book of Daniel, because it was the blitzkrieg before there was a blitzkrieg. It was the lightning warfare before Adolf did his thing through the Ardennes. I'm gonna save this, man. Now this is a better map, so I can show you where they originated, where Alexander originated. So you see Macedon. Now you have the Roman Republic, but you see Macedon. This is where the Macedonian armies originated, and this is where his empire originated. All right, and it expanded. Now this is a latter time period map. This is after, when you continue on with the verses, you'll get the four notable horns, which were the four generals, and that's where you see that Ptolemaic Empire. That's where that came from. The Seleucid Empire. That's where that came from. And at this point, because this is a map of 200 BC, the provinces in which was ruled by Cassander and Lysimachus, those had essentially been extinguished. Those dynasties were no longer in existence. You only had the Ptolemaic and the Seleucid at this period, where you see on this map. But I wanted to use it as an illustration to show you how the vicinity geographically, Alexander and the Macedonians, they originated in the west and they expanded east. They didn't expand west. They didn't conquer Rome. They didn't conquer the Gauls. They didn't conquer Europe. They didn't conquer the Celtic tribes. No, they expanded west. They expanded east. And east is that's where the blessed Holy Land is. That's where the Fertile Crescent, that's where the riches and abundance is. So in continuation, it says, verse 5, it says, and I was considering, behold, and he goat came from the west on the face of the whole earth. So that west is speaking of Macedon. And touched not the ground. Why did he touch not the ground? Because Daniel also said that he was like a leopard. And why did he say he was like a leopard? Because in 12 years, he conquered nearly all of the known world. From Macedon all the way to the mountains of the Hindu Kush of Afghanistan. Something of that like had never taken place before. He was a god amongst his peers. It says, and touch not the ground. It says, and the goat. Jake, you got people like this speak of, oh, I'm the goat. No. Alexander and the Greeks were the goat. You're not the goat. It says, and and Yahweh Shai is the shepherd. But it says, and touch not the ground. It says, and the goat had a notable horn between his eyes. Now let's go to that term notable in the Aramaic or the Hebrew. Because Daniel, this time, this is Aramaic, specifically speaking, which is it's the same thing as Hebrew, slight variations. So you get the term chazawath, which means vision, conspicuous. And why is it? Let me continue. A vision, oracle of a prophet, agreement, appearance, aspect, and notable, essentially going into his significance and his importance. That's why it says great horn. That's why right here, you see right here where it says great, it says or great horn, which great horn means great strength. And Alexander was that of great strength. He was. And that's why he's called Alexander the Great. That's why they call him Alexander the Great. And so the goat, the he goat, being the Macedonians and the Macedonian armies, and specifically speaking, the leader of that he goat, the head of that he goat, or the notable horn, is Alexander the Great of Macedon, son of Philip. Verse 6, it says, and he came to the ram. Now, in the previous verses, Daniel was given a prophecy of the ram, and the ram being the Medo-Persian Empire. And at this time period, the one that became greater at last was the Persians, via the Achaemenid dynasty and the campaigns of Cambyses. But at this time period, Alexander essentially came to the ram, meaning he made war with the Persian Empire, the Medo-Persian Empire. He made war with Darius. It says, and I saw him come close unto the ram, and he was moved with choler against him. Now that term choler means anger and hatred. And essentially, why is that? Because the Persians burnt down the holy cities of I believe it was Athens. Don't quote me on it, but the Persians in their campaigns in the provinces of Greece, in decades prior, they burnt down their gods, they desecrated their temples, and they just destroyed their inhabitants. Even though they weren't able to conquer them, they destroyed them. And for this, the Greeks held great hatred for the Persians. And so that's why it says Alexander, he moved again. No, this was personal for Alexander. This was personal. And that's why Alexander burnt down, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the provinces of Susa. Let me see here, because I believe Daniel was in Susa the palace when he had this vision. Let me see, what city of Persia did he burned down their capital city, which Susa was the capital city of was a chief city of the Achaemenid Empire. And it was vengeance. That was the choler that we saw prophetically being spoken of. Okay, it was Persepolis. He burnt down Persepolis, which Persepolis means city of Persia. see here. Oh, it says, why did he burn down Persepolis? Darius the Third. Yeah, he went out after Darius the Third, because Darius essentially is a title. You have multiple Dariuses. It says he burned the king's palaces at Persepolis for reasons we will never. No, we do know for sure. He burned it down because they burned down the temples of Greece, the decades prior, and that's why they say he moved for color. And yes, it was. Matter of fact, let me see. But see, they don't know prophecy. That's why they say we don't know for sure. They're just historians. That's it. But they have their lot. Let's see. Let me go, and I don't want to make this too elaborate. Let me see. See. Because that's the Greek term for it. Let me see. Parsa. Let me see. I believe it's the same as Susa. Shush. Let me see here. Sushan. It might be a different city. Let me see. Nevertheless, that's trivial. That aspect is more so trivial. Something that I and yourself can dig into just a tad bit later. Let's continue on with prophecy. So we know he burnt down Persepolis, and that was an aspect of him moving with choler, him moving with hatred and anger and rage against the Persians. It says, move with choler against him and smote the ram, and he smote the Persian Empire. It says, and break his two horns, meaning the power structure of the Persian and the Medes. Now, their political system actually stayed intact, and that's what actually gave the Greeks success in future generations. The satraps, the noblemen, things of that nature actually stayed in place. It was the kingdom was translated unto the Greeks. But the actual influence of the dynasty of the Achaemenid, no, that was diminished, and that was put to rest. The influence of the Medes as being an actual ruling powerhouse was no more. And rose, and what rose was the rise, or what came from it was the establishment of the Greeks. It says and smote the ram and break his two horns. It says, and there was no power in the ram to stand before him. Now let's see, how did this take place? This took place with 3 prominent battles, which was the final of the Persian-Greek wars. 3 prominent battles, being the Battle of Granicus, being the Battle of Issus, and the Battle of Gaugamela. Now, I want to speak specifically on the Battle of Gaugamela because that was the defining battle of the war. That was the defining battle. Let's see here. All right, now here we have a pictorial imagery of the actual battle with the Persians and the Macedonians. I want to read just a tad bit on this. It says the final clash between Alexander's forces and Darius' forces was at Gaugamela in the summer of 331 BC. But this time the Persian army was at its greatest, as they had an open, flat battlefield, as they had leveled it and cleared it in larger numbers. Alexander's formation was similar to the formation used at Issus. The Macedonian cavalry in both flanks were tilted inward in anticipation of the Persians' flanking maneuver, leading the Persian cavalry away from the heavy infantry center. Darius focused on, and why did he try to outflank him? Because he had an open battlefield, and he had superior numbers, and so he tried to flank Alexander's he tried to flank Alexander's left flank. But you see Alexander located on the right. The Persians tried to outflank Alexander, with his cavalry to the left, and he also tried to outflank him to the right, but specifically to the left and the backside of Alexander. It says Alexander's formation was similar to the formation used at Issus. The Macedonian cavalry in both flanks were tilted inward in anticipation of the Persian flanking maneuver, leading the Persian cavalry away from the heavy infantry center, which caused the weak point. Darius focused on the Macedonian right flank by sending his front forces there and creating a thinning on his lines lines to the left of Darius. Alexander was quick to take advantage of the situation, taking the companion cavalry directly towards the weak spot. And so Alexander he pierced the formation of the weakened formation of Darius. It says the Macedonian Petsterio clashed with the Persian infantry, while Alexander cut through the weak spot instead of counterattacking Darius. And this is when loyalty and fidelity comes in. And Darius didn't have that. He had money and he had mercenaries, but he didn't have true loyalty in his ranks. And this was the great compromise. It says instead of the counterattacking, Darius' forces rode towards the Macedonian camp. And so they tried to spoil the Greeks instead of maintaining their military efficiency on the battlefield in unison. It says, who were then slaughtered by the reserve troops. So these guys, and that was prophecy that made them do that. Like, they trying to spoil the Greeks, and then they got slaughtered, and because they didn't maintain their ranks. And that's a lesson for us all. It says reserve troops in the back of the army. Darius once again had to flee the battlefield as his center forces collapsed and prevented himself from being captured. Alexander's final battle opened the entirety of Persia to him. Persian morale was broken after 3 incredible defeats, and Alexander took no time in allowing it to recover. He was able to pacify the rest of Persia and move on the exotic lands of northwest Indus Valley. And ultimately what happened to Darius, he's fled and sought succor with the king of Arabia, where he was beheaded, and the Achaemenids were no more. It says, and break his two horns, this is verse 7, and break his two horns, which is the Persian and Medes, which are those are the horns. And there was no power in the ram to stand before him, but he cast him down to the ground and stamped upon him, and there was none that could deliver the ram out of his hand. Therefore the he-goat waxed very great, and when he was strong, the great horn was broken, which Alexander died. And that's written of in the book of Maccabees, in the beginning of the book of Maccabees in the Apocrypha books, speaks of the history of that. The Alexander dying after 12 years of reigning and pardoning his kingdom unto his 4 generals. It says, and it came up four notable ones toward the 4 winds of heaven, which those are his 4 generals, Lysimachus, Cassander, Ptolemy, and Seleucus. And so that's essentially the lesson regarding the he-goat. Lord willing, it was edifying. I'm gonna give all praises, honor, glory, and worship to Yahweh Bashim Yahushai, Bahashim Kakodash, the abundance of the elders and the apostle of Great Millstone. Salutations to you, Akim. Shalom, and keep the faith.